Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I'm Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode. Introduction, who are we and what are we doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week, we will be talking about Bonnie and Clyde. Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of and or references to violence, impotence, guns, betrayal, sibling relationships, parents who look really old for their age, people repeating the same joke, digital amputation, by which we mean digits being amputated from humans, not amputations being carried out via computer technology, death, poverty, auto theft, bank robberies, stick-em-ups, law enforcement, blood, bandages, severe head wounds, tattoos, Texas, destruction of property, the Great Depression, farm foreclosures, Southern accents, and berets.
Yeah, that about covers it.
I thought I left like 5 things out. At least.
I mean, there's a lot of shooting in this movie. So
yeah, sometimes just saying guns, violence, death, it isn't quite enough for all the kinds of violence. And it's really special that the violence in Bonnie and Clyde still holds up as shocking all these many decades of societal disintegration later.
Rena, can you give us the spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie. Consider yourself warned.
Just some of the sources used in this episode include The Studio by John Gregory Dunn, Pictures at a Revolution by Mark Harris, Looking for Gatsby by Faye Dunaway, Public Enemies by Brian Burrows, Faye, a documentary that is on HBO about the life of Faye Dunaway, Go Down Together by Jeff Gwynne, podcasts including the Criminalia episode titled The Reluctant Blanche Barrow, Bonnie Wasn't the Only Dame in Clyde Barrow's Gang, American History Hit, Bonnie and Clyde, and Infamous America multi-part series on Bonnie and Clyde.
Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about the movie Bonnie and Clyde?
Yeah, buckle up. This is one of my favorite movies. And it's so funny because we talked early on about what our favorite biopics are. And I don't even necessarily think of this truly as a biopic, but it is. But we'll get there. This movie is a pretty extraordinary document. It is lightning in a bottle. It's kind of a perfect storm of many things. There's new talent. There's big game-changing technique ideas. There's ultra-violence, sexuality. It's hard to forget that Gene Hackman wasn't Gene Hackman yet. Faye Dunaway wasn't Faye Dunaway yet. She got this part, she said, by the skin of her teeth, and other actors who were in the mix for the role of Bonnie included Jane Fonda, Tuesday Weld, who I'm pretty sure turned it down, Anne Margaret, Carol Lindley, Leslie Caron, Sue Lyon, and Natalie Wood, who also turned it down, partially because she had had a rather tumultuous relationship with Warren Beatty years before. And did I mention Warren Beatty? Everyone in this kind of really meets the moment. The movie was written by David Newman and Robert Benton. It had some uncredited contributions by Warren Beatty and Robert Towne, who was a genius. Newman and Benton, in their screenwriting partnership, are responsible for a couple of really incredible movies, including the original 1978 Superman, which is a pretty perfect movie, and Peter Bogdanovich's What's Up, Doc. This was the first screenplay they wrote together and got made. This movie was a huge labor of love for Warren Beatty, and it was part of this game-changing era of filmmaking that is documented really beautifully in the book Pictures at a Revolution. At the time, Warren Beatty was not taken seriously as an artist. He was described by Time magazine as an on-again, off-again actor who moonlighted as a global escort. He was also considered a huge pain in the ass to work with. He was really picky and difficult on set. And Warren Beatty was actually so serious about this movie that he thought about financing it himself when it was going to be a lower budget movie. But Warner Brothers eventually agreed to finance it. Jack Warner was really meh on the whole thing. He said at the time, "Who wants to see the rise and fall of a couple of rats?" Structurally, the movie really nods to a past style of filmmaking, the violent gangster movies of the 90s, and also what was happening in the Nouvelle Vague in France. Newman and Benton actually wanted Jean-Luc Godard to direct, but he passed.
I had not realized that the scriptwriters for Bonnie and Clyde also wrote Superman, which makes me think, does it come into play later that they know how to write for Gene Hackman?
That is a great question because they wrote two incredible roles for Gene Hackman, didn't they? I will make a case for Gene Hackman deserving an Academy Award nomination for Lex Luthor. That is amazing performance.
We always wind up with an unpredictable thread tying us back to the previous week. So I think the connecting thread I'm seeing here is, in terms of your mention of Gene Hackman and Superman, the way that we don't recognize actors for doing great things within certain genres because Val Kilmer did not get the Oscar nomination that he deserved for Tombstone.
Also, another through line here too, linking back to The Devils, is Warner Brothers is, spoiler alert, in about 3 paragraphs, gonna try and fucking bury this movie.
I'm glad that Godard didn't direct because even worse than Warren Beatty, he's the original toxic dude, bro.
I can't imagine what an insufferability contest the two of them would have gotten into. That said, there's a lot of Godard-esque activity in this movie. Beatty heard about the screenplay from Godard and he was very interested in it. He thought about directing it himself or just staying behind the camera in a production role, but he ended up playing the role of Clyde. So he offered the job for director to George Stevens, Wyler, Carol Reese, John Schlesinger, and Sidney Pollack, all of them passing. Godard thought that the movie should be directed by an American, but obviously not all of those people on that list are American. And Arthur Penn, who did end up directing it, turned it down several times before Beatty finally convinced him to take the job. Beatty also originally wanted to consider shooting it in black and white, and Warner Brothers was like, that's okay, we're all set. And so it was made in color.
I cannot imagine Anne Margaret as Bonnie because I think of her in her Bye Bye Birdie role. I can't imagine Kim as Bonnie.
Yeah, there's a lot of people in that list I can't imagine as Bonnie. Even I adore Tuesday Weld. There's a world where we get to see Tuesday Weld in every role she turned down. Because it's an insane list, but no one else could have done this the way Faye Dunaway did it.
No, and if Jane Fonda does this movie, then they shoot horses, don't they? Because she's not going to do 2 depression films in a few years.
Yeah, and she wasn't quite Jane Fonda as we would come to know her yet here. She was also struggling to be taken seriously at this point in her career too. Now I would like to take a moment to heap praise on this film's editor, a woman named Dee Allen. So just a little bit about her. She was an art student and she was really passionate about film, and she left college to become a messenger at Columbia Studios. She ended up being mentored by Robert Wise, who we know as the director of West Side Story and a ton of other things. And she really was one of the pioneers of this new way of filmmaking and is, I think, as critical to the change in Hollywood filmmaking as any of the other filmmakers we talk about, which is largely a male bunch. But she edited some of the best movies that are out there. This, Dog Day Afternoon, The Hustler, Serpico, Slapshot, The Wiz, Reds, The Breakfast Club, The Addams Family, Wonder Boys, she was someone very special. So we get the movie made, and initially the movie was not well regarded. Like, critics were all like, what the fuck is this? But Pauline Kael, truly a hero of this art form and one who was unafraid to celebrate its changes, wrote a piece for The New Yorker that really helped to turn the tide. She was the first to identify it as a gateway to a new kind of movie making. And Warren Beatty, a man who now only appears on TMC every 5 years to preserve his ownership of the Dick Tracy rights, and has always been kind of bad at self-promoting, which is weird because he's Warren Beatty. He went from theater to theater across the country to drive support for the film. He actually worked closely with the screenwriters to create the PR and marketing campaign. This movie is like, this is a real corkboard and red thread journey to success. I can't take you through all the machinations of it, but Mark Harris does it beautifully in Pictures That Are Revolution. But basically, Warner Brothers botched the initial release of this because Jack Warner was like, I don't care for this. It was successful in some markets, but it wasn't getting the widespread acclaim that it would. But Warner Brothers basically went back to the drawing board after media started to really praise it, including putting it on the cover of Time magazine. And Time magazine had initially written a bad review of it at first, like everybody else. And they admitted in that cover story that they got it wrong. The movie started to, garner some attention on end-of-year top 10 lists. And Warren Beatty finally got that wide release because he basically insisted on it in a really mean way. And Warner Brothers thought he was going to sue them.
What occurred to me in there was that Warner Brothers was the studio that made the films that glamorized the characters that Bonnie and Clyde were imitating. So it's ironic and appropriate that old man Jack Warner doesn't get it, because I love me some Cagney. I just watched the Roaring Twenties movie. I had a 3-film Bogart marathon a few months ago, which is exactly the way to watch Bogart, so that just to get into the pace of the older acting style, and his movies are still so digestible. It's appropriate in some way having to do with the passage of time that Jack Warner doesn't get it, when this is like the echo of what he put out there at the dawn of sound filmmaking.
This is a weird history rhyming situation where they make a movie that kind of reflects back on that glamour in a very arch way. And I can see why he didn't get it or why he didn't like it, but he's wrong.
It's also funny to me that now that, like, there was a time when New Yorker reviews could change the world, because nobody cares what anybody has to say anymore, including our most eloquent smarty pantses. Nobody cares.
Yeah, go write an article, see what happens. They gave it the second look it deserved and eventually released it nationwide. It took 27 weeks for the film to become a hit, but oh boy, was it a hit.
Yes, that is the second thing that I was thinking of, that movies used to have time to marinate in long release. Like, I remember when we were kids and I would look at the arts and leisures in the paper, I would be like 8 or 7 years old, tracking how long does this movie stay in the newspaper. And movies had time to have a quiet weekend and then come back or get bigger and find an audience. And I remember, I think Steven Spielberg said that one of the things that thrilled him with Indiana Jones was going to see it in a theater a year after it had come out. That was a thing that happened until about 30 years ago, I think.
Nobody has that kind of patience anymore.
Faye Dunaway went on to mess up the Best Picture announcement in 2017. It's all good.
Faye Dunaway is one of my gods. I love her so much. I think also, like, speaking to the impact of this film, is it was the final nail in the coffin of the career as a film critic at the New York Times of Bosley Crowther. He had that job for almost 40 years. and he did not care for this movie and said so. He didn't care for a lot of things that were actually quite good, but his dislike of this film was the final thing that made him like get moved to a different desk. We talked about Roger Ebert last week. We were ragging on him for hating The Devils. He loved this, and I think his review of it really kind of captures the essence of it, which is, Bonnie and Clyde is a milestone in the history of American movies, a work of truth and brilliance. It is also pitilessly cruel, filled with sympathy, nauseating, funny, heartbreaking, and astonishingly beautiful. It does not seem that those words should be strung together. Perhaps that is because movies do not very often reflect the full range of human life. And with that, Rena, can you tell us a little bit about the Bonnie and Clyde?
I sure can. So in this, I was especially aided by Jeff Gwynn's book, Go Down Together. I listened to a few podcasts. So who were Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker? Well, they died very young. They were still they barely made it into their mid-20s. She was born in 1910. He was born in 1909. They were both from Texas. Clyde Barrow's family were sharecroppers. His parents, Cumie and Henry, had dreamed of owning their own farm someday. But right after World War I, the price of cotton, first it goes very high during the war, and then it just plummets immediately after because the rest of the world can now grow its own cotton. His family winds up in Dallas, where his father's business is now driving a cart with an old horse around to find scrap metal, which he's finding and selling. They do not have a tent. They live under their cart. They are every exaggeration about we were so poor, except that it's real. His mother was very religious. And Bonnie and Clyde both went to church. They prayed. They were devout. They believed in Jesus Christ. And Clyde and his brother Buck get their start. It's Buck's influence at the beginning, stealing chickens. Stealing poultry was a honored boyhood habit. They live in West Dallas, there's another area outside Dallas called Cement City after the factories there, but they're both places that Dallas looks down its nose at, and in West Dallas, the streets turn to mud when it rains. And Bonnie Parker loves she loves being as a girl, she loves being the center of attention. She loves to sing. She writes poetry. She says she's going to sing on Broadway when she grows up. She's described as a little girl having like this head full of cotton colored curls. She adores being the center of attention, and she loses her father. Her family moves to West Dallas, where like they were even worse off. And Bonnie, even if she had graduated from high school, her destiny was probably to work domestically. She marries at 15. She's still married to this guy who is not Clyde Barrow the whole time she's with Clyde Barrow and has a tattoo of him. She just never gets around to divorcing him because he's in prison too. And she just says, I don't feel like kicking him when he's down, even though she's in love with Clyde. Clyde and Buck are constantly in trouble with the law, and he meets Bonnie at a party after she she is separated from her husband. She's waitressing. Jeff Gwynn suggests she might have been turning tricks, but we don't know. Clyde gets sent to prison, and we'll talk about this more later. He breaks out of prison. They also don't have it in the movie that Bonnie was in jail herself for a while, but got out. He's worried because her letters to him get less and less frequent while he's away. And then eventually he chops off 2 of his toes with an axe to get out of prison faster, and his mother procures a pardon for him the following week. There were lots of pardons being given out because the prisons were vastly overcrowded. They were often holding 2 or 3 times more people than they were designed to hold. So it was not that hard to get a pardon in Texas because they needed to make more space in the prisons. And here's where you get into legend conflicting with real life. And I think this movie does show that their lives are not that glamorous. Like, the best they ever have it is when they're renting that little apartment with Buck and Blanche. The truth behind that famous line from this movie, a correct version of that line would go, "This here's Miss Bonnie Parker. I'm Clyde Barrow. We rob mom and pops." Bonnie and Clyde robbed maybe 15 banks over several years on the run, which is not that many banks per year. Mostly, Bonnie and Clyde robbed mom and pops. They stole cars, and they stole cars from individuals who still had a car during the Depression, but they were not stealing the cars directly from Henry Ford. They held up service stations. The banks that they were stealing from were state and local banks. It looked a lot more like Jimmy Stewart's bank from It's a Wonderful Life than like Chase Manhattan headquarters, which they never would have gotten near. They're small time, and Dillinger and Pretty Boy Floyd looked down on them as amateurs. They stole a lot of cars. They were small time thieves who had a decent run of it. Bigger, famous gangsters wanted nothing to do with them. Clyde's big dream was to break a lot of people out of the prison where he had once been held. Their take for robberies was often in the low double digits money-wise, and they never got very far on what they'd stolen before needing to steal again. And their story is full of great anecdotes about how very small time they were, except that they stayed on the run long enough to get the attention of the nation and had some luck with publicity, if you want to call it luck. I would say the most successful criminal is someone who has zero notoriety at all, but maintains an upper middle class lifestyle.
As some additional context on what a big old FU they're robbing those banks is this was before the creation of the entity known as the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which guarantees money that is robbed from a bank or stolen from a bank. Basically, it's a certification that money can be replaced. And so those people were just SOL, like the money's gone, banks failed, and now your money's gone. So it was a pretty shitty thing to do to everybody.
And such a high percentage of farms were failing that it was not that hard for them to find abandoned places to stay. There were stories about how applications to convents were up. They were just booming. And most of the girls weren't even Catholic. They just wanted 3 square meals a day. Like, the Depression was terrible. And it's a level of poverty that you and I can't begin to comprehend.
Indeed. At the rate we're going, anyway.
To put in a story about how crazy it is that they stayed on the run long enough to get famous, they would do things like Clyde figured out that they should switch the license plates on all the cars that they were stealing so that they wouldn't be tracked. So what he'd do is, when he stole a car, he would take the license plate off of it, but he would save license plates from other cars that he'd stolen and switch them.
He did have some cleverness to him.
Except they're still going to track your plate number to a stolen car.
I see where the idea is good, and then I see how quickly it fails. However, at the same time, though, when you look at how policing worked back in the day, like, all you had to do was basically get to the edge of town, and you were going to get away with it. Because this was also before the creation of the FBI. Just to kind of start off, I don't know how old you were when you saw this movie, but I was 11. There was this sort of weird, like, Talmudic loophole of film watching in my household, which is to say that if I read the book that it was based on, I was allowed to engage with that piece of art. For the most part, there were a couple exceptions to this, notably A Clockwork Orange and Taxi Driver. And also, it was the era when TBS aired movies that were all kind of like questionable PGs. They edited them, but it's also like, no, you're still seeing all the violence. So the first time I saw this was on TBS when I was about 11. It shook me quite a bit, even though I didn't really know why. I didn't catch all of it necessarily, but Faye Dunaway, I saw her and I was like, oh, that's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And she still may be the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Theodora Van Runkel's costumes really fascinated me. I was definitely interested. I had seen Dick Tracy at that point, so that was what I knew Warren Beatty from. And You're So Vain. But yeah, this movie really blew my mind the first time I saw it.
So I have a story about Theodora Van Runkel and her costumes here that while she was in wardrobe for Bonnie and Clyde, she ran into Edith Head, and Edith Head asked her what she was working on. And she said she was making Bonnie and Clyde, and she said it's set in the 30s. Edith Head just waves her hand and says, oh, just do chiffon. We always did chiffon in the 30s. Wrong movie, because those 30s weren't about showing the real 30s, or if they did show the 30s in the 30s, they would have a little bit of realism that would be tempered by the end with, it's okay, girls. Now you get to marry a millionaire, and you get to marry a millionaire, and you get to marry a millionaire, and you get to marry a millionaire.
Also, something that stayed with me until like right this second, and will continue to stay with me is Buck Barrow's death in this movie. Watching Blanche Barrow be questioned with the bandages over her eyes, seeing the police walk out of the room when she's still talking, watching the way Bonnie interacted with her mother, and just like the fact that they were so beautiful and they were so cruel, and I had never seen anything like it. And I shouldn't have been watching it when I was in the 6th grade, but here we are. And I would say this movie was kind of a gateway drug for me, for a lot of other filmmaking. It's like one of the reasons why I was staying home on Saturday nights and watching Mean Streets instead of drinking in the forest with my classmates.
I never would have passed up a chance at alcohol as a teenager for anything. That's amazing.
I didn't even know where the parties were.
So it was stay home and watch this or wander around in the woods trying to find the people who are cool enough to know how to get alcohol in high school.
Yeah, which would have kind of been like me acting out Bonnie and Clyde anyway.
But back to the more important thing here, the death of Buck Barrow. This is actually crazier in real life because he lives for days while they are on the run and camping out, and he has a hole in his head because they shoot him through the head. It goes in one side and exits the other, and he's still talking. He's still coming in and out of lucidity. He's aware, and they deal with the bullet hole through his brain by flushing it out with hydrogen peroxide. When Bonnie and Clyde and the Barrow gang would get shot at on the road, they didn't have access to medical care. So the best they could do was take an aspirin and then try to fish the bullets out themselves with a tweezer or a hairpin or whatever they had handy.
Doesn't sound much better than what they had at a hospital.
Buck Barrow also gets shot about 6 times, and he lives, and he dies in the hospital, and they say he doesn't die from the head wound, he dies from pneumonia from the chest surgery. But he was talking most of the time. But also, another thing they don't put in here is that Bonnie was grievously injured at one point when Clyde was driving too fast, spun off the road, and the battery acid from the car leaked onto her leg, crippling her. So for the final part of her life, she couldn't really walk. She would hop, and Clyde would have to carry her because the battery acid burned into her leg so badly that you could see bone, and they couldn't seek medical attention. At one point, they did find a doctor, and he said, yeah, she needs to go to a hospital. And they said, we're not taking her to a hospital, but you're not going to do that to a set of legs like Faye Dunaway's. You're just not.
No, that sounds horrifying. I think it's also worth mentioning, as I said, this is one of my favorite movies. I've seen it so many times, and I really tried to go into this experience with fresh eyes. We were fortunate enough to get to go see it on the big screen together at the Film Forum, which was such a treat.
And the Film Forum in New York is such a special place, and they have this popcorn where I've been complaining about the lack of butter for many years, but it's fine. you put salt on it. I neglected in my rather meandering bio to mention they're dead. They were both dead by their mid-20s. The law caught up with them, and they die in a shootout after a couple years on the road and go down to legend. And we'll talk about this over the course of the film.
I mean, just to open it up, I don't think that the real Bonnie and Clyde have necessarily earned the fullness of the characters that are portrayed here. They were clearly pretty shitty criminals. They weren't actually this attractive or good looking, but that's 100% not the point of this movie. And Bonnie and Clyde are sort of a blank canvas onto which Warren Beatty presents his vision. And I say that even though, yeah, Arthur Penn directed the movie, but this is Warren Beatty's movie. This movie is a really beautiful meshing of the fantasy of glamour with the reality of violence. And this is why I get super annoyed with Bonnie and Clyde remakes or like the musical on Broadway, because this isn't the actual reality of who they were. And so then you have this like meta level of any interpretations of Bonnie and Clyde that happen after this, where they're fashionable and they're beautiful and glamorous and, you know, and very like intellectually engaged in their own mystique. And it's like a copy of a copy of a copy. And it doesn't work because that's not the real story. And it's like everyone is kind of adapting their Bonnie and Clyde story from this movie's perception of Bonnie and Clyde. And it's lazy bullshit. And it's done in this movie for a very specific set of reasons. And it is not true to the experience of Bonnie and Clyde. As you mentioned, a battery acid burn down to the bone. And also, like, all of these criminals tormented the cops because it was so goddamn easy. Get to the town line and you're free. And we see it in the movie later when they get to Oklahoma and those cops are like, screw it, I'm not going to Oklahoma.
It is crazy that law enforcement couldn't go over state lines. It's just nuts.
Cops had no way to communicate with the other jurisdictions. There weren't radios. And, you know, and we'll see in the annals of crime in the future that sometimes having this technology doesn't actually matter. They still don't share information. Like initially, as an example, the police didn't think there was any connection between the murders of Sharon Tate and the murders of the LaBianca family, and had two different precincts working on that. And put a pin in Charles Manson, we'll be back. And the movie Zodiac also really illustrates just this refusal for different constituencies to work with each other. There's a Roger Ebert quote that I was thinking about immediately in this viewing of, you know, it's not what a movie is about, it's how it is about it. So the subject is not nearly as important as the manner in which it is executed. The execution here is really spectacular. And to me, this isn't a movie about Bonnie and Clyde necessarily. It's about our perception of the glamour of crime. It's about celebrity. It's about becoming famous. It's about taking on the man through righteousness. It's about manufacturing your own legend. And this is something that film has played with since the beginning of film. This is an auteur project belonging to Warren Beatty, because he continued to explore these topics in all of his subsequent movies, with a few exceptions. I'm looking at you, Love Affair, and Town and Country, but like Shampoo, Reds, Heaven Can Wait, Ishtar, Bugsy, and even Dick Tracy all played with these themes. Even when he wasn't directing, he was very much in charge on a film set. I was trying to come up with a good comp of movies that we watched, and I landed on Listomania, which different film, different outcome. There are no rocket ships in this movie, but it's wholly a vision that while it's about Bonnie and Clyde, it's also about what the makers of this movie wanted them to represent and what story they wanted them to tell. And this movie had the serendipity to come out in a moment where it became the moment, and it became a thesis on where we were going. And, you know, we open on Bonnie posing like a movie star, being the most beautiful person ever put on film, which is Faye Dunaway, of course, looking bored and frustrated. And she sees Warren Beatty as Clyde trying to steal her mother's car out her window. And she runs out to confront him, and he immediately charms her.
One thing that occurred to me is that normally when I reflect that Actually, what they're filming is only 30 years ago, so I'm not going to be that impressed that they got the cars right. And for here, I don't care. It's Bonnie and Clyde. And boy, do they beat those vintage cars up. And I also feel like a 1930s car was just an impressive thing. Even the ones that are supposed to be beaten up are memorable. And there's something about crashing a 30s car in the 60s. Like, I don't care if someone crashes a 90s car now. Once the Ford Taurus came out, all cars looked the same.
Yeah. Yeah, that Ford Taurus really homogenized all of us.
Bonnie is visibly naked behind the window that she's standing at, and we have an immediate case of U 2.0, which is the phenomena where whoever plays you in the movie is much better looking than you in real life. Beatty does affect a limp. Clyde had to have his shoes off to drive because he was missing 2 toes. And in real life, Bonnie and Clyde were quite short. She was about 4'11", which suited Clyde fine because he was barely 5'5". And prior to Bonnie, he had had other girlfriends. He would stand on the curb while posing with other girlfriends so that they wouldn't be taller than him in heels. And she was cute, but neither of them looked like movie stars. I mean, who does? Even movie stars don't look like movie stars. Also, in real life, they were both like disabled later on because she could only hop and he already had a limp from what he had to do to get out of jail. There's something a little off about both of them. There's the way that she kind of prances when she walks. And I like that the first dress they have her in does not fit her very well at all. Like, nothing they're wearing fits well. And it gets better as they're stealing more stuff. And actually, they were both clothes horses, but they often had to leave what they stole on the road when they were fleeing. I like it that they have her in, like, these flimsy little flat shoes because, yeah, she's a waitress. She's on her feet all day, and then later she has to be able to run. The real Bonnie Parker wore heel. Like, it was a daring thing for her to wear heels because she might have to run.
I can't run in heels.
No, nor can I.
Clyde has an interior character. We get to know that a bit more as the movie goes on. But when we meet him, this is like a showman, aw shucks, con artist persona. Like, they start walking and he's just full of flattery, saying she's beautiful, that she could be a movie star. And then, like, literally we find out that she's waiting tables. Like, how gorgeous and perfect is it in this moment when he's blowing her up, telling her she can be a big star? She's a waitress, like everyone who wants to be a star starts off. He offers to take her away from all of it and to give her a more glamorous life and make her famous, and she takes it.
It's the best offer she's gonna get. I love a meet cute, but I don't like love at first sight. I'm like, oh please. It really tests my willingness to suspend disbelief, but it's Bonnie and Clyde. So once again, this is me saying I don't care because this movie just has me nailed to my seat from the beginning and I believe it. In real life, they meet at a party and there's that whole thing where he goes to prison and she's in jail for another thing later and he sends for her. Like, so as with nearly all romances, it is more involved in real life before they, like here, it's like they meet, they fall in love, and they go on the lam, and it's all within like an hour.
Yeah, and also, like many romantic relationships, it begins in prison. I never buy them as being in love in this movie.
Really?
I do not see them as two people who are in love with each other. At least I didn't when I was watching it this time. It seems like a relationship of convenience and, on her end, desire, but it doesn't feel like a relationship that has any kind of place that could exist in the real world.
Well, of course it can't exist in the real world because they're criminals. They're on the run. They're not going to make plans around settling down, but they were very much in love. Like, she said that she'd never leave him because up until her name really gets out, she could have said, he made me do all those things. And because the flip side of everything being even harder for a woman than it is now is that, like, Jeff Gwynne keeps saying, like, a jury would have believed her if she'd said he made me do all those things. But she wanted to be with him until she died.
It didn't feel like it watching it this time. I don't know how to explain that any more than just I felt like it was a relationship that wasn't like actual love. He proves to her that he can give her a glamorous life by robbing a store, and he shows her the gun beforehand. And if there were ever a scene where it's like it's not really about a gun, it's about a penis, this is it right here. Like he pulls the gun out of his pants and shows her secretively, and she's all, "Is that real?" And he's like, "Yes, it is."
Well, you feel whenever she sees that gun or whenever they say we rob banks, it's like there's a second heartbeat pounding between her legs. And so the thing about Clyde will say, I ain't no lover boy. The impotence thing I've heard is something that Warren Beatty wanted in there to make the character more interesting. Clyde had girlfriends before Bonnie, who said that he didn't have a problem.
We weren't there. And it's a good tool for this story in some ways. She's like so hot for him after he robs the bank, and he's, insisting, "I'm not gay." I never saw the benefit of being in a relationship. And Rena, also, I'm hoping that you could maybe talk here a little bit about Clyde's time in prison and how that could result in the kind of trauma that makes someone reluctant to associate positive things with sex.
So Clyde Barrow, being short, skinny, and by prison standards relatively pretty, was not cut out to be someone who had an easy time of it in prison. I don't know if I remembered to say sexual assault or rape in the trigger warning, but if I forgot, there was a lot to mention, so if I forgot that, I'm doing it now. He got raped a lot by one man in particular who was bigger, tougher, and just really made his life hell, and it was traumatizing. Jeff Gwynne says it's not in his mythology, but what happens is there's another prisoner in there who feels sorry for Clyde, who's in for life, who tells Clyde that if he can murder this guy, he'll take the rap for it because it's not going to make a difference. So Clyde does do this. He murders his rapist with a pipe, and then he just wants to get out of prison because Bonnie's letters are coming less and less frequently. There's one where it's been so long that he writes her back that he was surprised to hear from her. And he wants to get off of the farm gang. So he makes the plan and this is something people would do to get out of prison. He's going to chop off 2 of his own toes with an axe, which he does. And then a week later, his mother, Kumi, gets a parole for him, so he comes home on crutches.
I mean, reading about the prison experience of that era, I would probably happily cut off some of my toes to get out of that work. Like, it sounded horrible.
Both of us had the audiobook of Jeff Gwynne, and I listened to it a couple times to get it really cemented into my head.
So they are driving out of town, and they get to a diner, and they're talking, and she has her hair done a certain way, and he tells her to change her hair because the waitress who he doesn't find attractive has the same hairdo. He's already making her over. And then they happen onto a farm where he's teaching her how to shoot, and the former owners of the farm come upon them and are just saying goodbye to the house because it's been foreclosed upon because depression. And they all shoot at the bank sign on the gate saying that they've taken possession of the house and the farm. And we really come upon here like the movie's other big theme, which is just this anti-establishmentism. There is not a positive portrayal of a cop anywhere to be found in this film. Our main villain is a cop. All authority is portrayed really poorly here. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't be, but they are. And now we start robbing banks, and the first bank they go to has just failed, so that's hilarious.
But the banks they robbed were small.
Yeah.
Their main nemesis in the law was a Dallas sheriff named Smoot Schmid. Frank Hamer was a Texas Ranger who he had currently left the Rangers because he didn't like Ma Ferguson. So he's tempted back on. And this guy that they have chasing him seems like kind of a bumbler. And it would be such a distraction within how cogent this film is. But IRL, Blanche was personally interrogated by J. Edgar Hoover later.
One of the things this film plays very truthfully to is the fact that, like, when the time comes to shut this shit down, the government is happy to make an example out of them. They're getting their stolen car fixed up. And as you mentioned, there are a lot of stolen cars in this movie. Like, I couldn't keep track. And we meet C.W. Moss, who's played by Michael J. Pollard, really wonderfully. And he decides to join up with them like he's got nothing better going on.
So CW is actually a composite character. There was a teenaged kid who was the son of Clyde's mother's best friend, W.D. Jones, who they had him with them on the road for a while. And after the whole first run that ends in the crash and losing Buck, they find two other men to be the New Barrow gang. And the New Barrow gang is kind of like when a band is touring and it's replaced half its members, and they're eventually turned in by one of these guys. So CW is a composite between W.D. Jones and the guy who turned them in. Just as the Blanche that we see here is Blanche is kind of a composite between they need her to be a foiled Bonnie, but also one of the two guys that they had with them in the final run had a really annoying girlfriend who, like, wanted a share while having not really done anything. And Blanche, to be fair, she did a lot of domestic labor for everybody. And she was lookout.
We're always happy to undermine domestic labor in this country. That's a proud tradition. So the next robbery goes well, except for CW, who is going to be their driver, parks the car and is not there when they make an exit. And Clyde has to kill a cop for them to escape. We see throughout this movie that we're kind of like making these concentric circles towards death. Like, each incident that they experience, we're getting a little bit closer to it. Things get a little less fantastical and it's more real. And it's done in this really, like, lovely way where you don't even realize the noose is tightening until suddenly there is blood. We go to the movies after that and we're watching Gold Diggers of 1933. And yes, I just knew this because I am so cool. And Ginger Rogers is singing We're in the Money, and they kind of are, but it's coming at a cost. I would say that the exchange rate for their labor to their earnings is not amazing. And CW is crying because he feels really guilty about the death of the cop. I just love scenes like this where we see past art used to comment ironically on modern circumstances. Robert Altman does this really well in The Long Goodbye. We see Bonnie again rehearsing for fame, posing in the mirror, looking at herself, and she tries again to have sex with Clyde, but it's not going to happen. Enter the film Buck Barrow and his lovely wife, Blanche. So Gene Hackman and Estelle Parsons. I'm really jealous of people who met Gene Hackman for the first time watching this movie. Like, can you imagine?
Yeah, just wow.
What else do we need to know about the real Buck and Blanche?
So Buck was Clyde's big brother, and Clyde really looked up to him. And Buck had a couple wives before Blanche. He had a kid. That is not touched on, nor is it really important. And the real Blanche was only a year younger than Bonnie. She was very pretty. She also wrote poetry, and they make her into this marm here, I guess, because they need a foil. But what I've thought about, on the one hand, this film sort of did Blanche dirty, but then I realized I kind of did my memory of the performance dirty, because you do see that she and Buck are, like, into each other. The real Blanche was, people would still talk about this in the towns that they'd hidden out with years later, that Blanche bought this pair of super tight jodhpur riding pants and riding boots, which weren't a thing that people had. It's like she must have seen photos of the horsey set in, like, fancy northern states and thought, I want to dress like that. But people in the towns, they were still talking about Blanche's jodhpurs decades later. And you do see, like, Estelle Parsons in a pair of pants like that, but there's the sense that the real Blanche made them look hot. So she comes across as just this annoying person there, and I don't think it's fair to her. But I also think that my reaction to Estelle Parsons in this when I was younger wasn't 100% fair either.
Yeah, and she's really, really, really good in this movie.
She later remarried and had a relatively quiet life. Like, she served her time, and her vision was permanently damaged in one eye, and she blamed Harry Truman for it.
I mean, can't blame her. So at this point, too, because we have the gift of watching these 5 ridiculously talented actors working together, there's just like so much interesting shit happening between these characters as they're meeting. You're seeing this interplay that's going on in the background all the time. There is always like something to put your eyes on in the background and some interaction that's telling you about these characters. It's so magical. We see how Bonnie is really starting to lean into this act of crafting her own image. She poses it with a gun and a cigar on the hood of the car for a photo. And photos are a real through line in this movie too. The opening credits are all old photos, and we see a lot of people getting their pictures taken throughout this movie to tell their stories. And that's another way that it really nods at this idea of stardom. We also see a great moment here too where they're playing board games, and we see what is really the only remaining piece of something that was in the original draft of the screenplay, which was a sexual relationship between CW and Clyde. And that got taken out really early on. But we see Clyde kind of holding him in this very loving way that's very much in parallel to the way Buck and Blanche are sitting. This was a nice way to kind of weave in that really subtly and also show them as sort of a family. Bonnie starts reading her poetry here, demonstrating like she could have been a writer. Like if we could have gotten her on a train to New York, she could have been at the round table.
I mean, her poetry she needed a full high school education. I think her poetry is kind of like, it rhymes and it's homespun. Her poetry is not that great. It's just that she writes it.
Yeah, I should dial that back. It's poetry, but
you need to dial that back.
Yeah, I am officially dialing that back. However, it does stand that she has an instinct for writing that could have been, with a good education, channeled into something more positive. How's that?
I think that's better. Because it's also like, what poetry has she heard? She's probably heard like 19th century popular verse that rhymed and was very sentimental. So that's what she's referring to.
She's all Stephen freaking Foster, play it. So also at this point, they get groceries delivered, and the grocery boy knows something's up at the house by the way they're behaving.
Yeah, because they would have paper over the windows and they wouldn't let delivery people into the house, which is like a dead giveaway in a small town.
Yeah. It's so interesting to see this stuff because it's the kind of thing that I'm like, this is just what we do now. I don't let the fresh direct guy come in and unload my groceries with me.
Buck had just gotten out of prison. He'd gotten a pardon from Ma Ferguson, and his record was clean, and he was trying to convince his little brother to give himself up. And he was like, you'll get 9 or 10 years, maybe you'll get out. And he was there to persuade Clyde to give up on the life of crime, and Clyde wasn't having it, and they need to get more money. So Buck eventually winds up participating in the small robberies with him. And there goes that plan. But Blanche had tried to get him out of prison. They were already married, and she would do things like she would find random children who were not hers to come with her to plead to government officials to let her husband out. She'd also pretend to be heavily pregnant, but he'd been in prison for a year.
I mean, yeah, that math isn't mathin'.
She's like, please let my husband out in time to see his child.
I've been holding it inside of me like they made Grandma Kennedy do to poor Rosemary. So the cops come again, and they're better prepared than they have been in the past. They have an armored vehicle, but the gang manages to escape, but not without killing a few cops and causing some mayhem. And Blanche is so ill prepared for this that she just starts screaming. And God bless this detail. She never lets go of the spatula that she had in her hand while she was cooking. And this exit's a little more dangerous. And we find out a really easy way to escape the police because they don't have radios. It's just to shoot out their tires.
Or there was one time where they had to get away from the police, so Clyde drove right through them and just floored it. You had a note here about them happening to have grenades on them, but Bonnie and Clyde. So among the cases where they were successful robbers is they robbed armories. So I wouldn't put it past them to have gotten a hold of a grenade.
My grenade delight has wound down a little bit since we saw the movie, but it occupied some space in my brain for a couple of days. Like,
I'm not sure if they actually used grenades, but I feel like if you can repair a car, you can figure out how to build a grenade. Have you ever seen that poster that shows this woman in 50s gear with she's tapping her face with a pencil and it says, "If you can bake a cake, you can build a bomb."
I've baked a cake from a mix. Does that count?
No. So I've baked a layer cake from instructions in Mark Bittman, and so I'm the one who has to make the grenades when we go on the lam.
Yes. I think we're best off if we don't start a crime spree.
And I was going to ask you, bake cakes, build grenades, or go on the lam, because I can make a layer cake from How to Cook Anything. It's not that hard. It's just time consuming.
I think that you and I are uniquely unqualified to go on the lam.
It'd be terrible.
I think about the costume changes in this movie and the amount of stuff I'd need to look good. So we have our first meeting with Gomer Pyle's Frank Hamer. His portrayal in this film was controversial. He never actually met Bonnie and Clyde face to face IRL, and he wasn't their dumb hick Javert, as I would describe him in this movie. And when this movie came out, Frank Hamer's widow and son sued the movie producers for defamation of character over his portrayal.
Mm-hmm.
They obtained an out-of-court settlement in 1971. And Frank Hamer has been portrayed more honorably in a movie called The Highwaymen, which is pretty good, and it uses Kevin Costner's dead-eyed charisma to tell the story of tracking Bonnie and Clyde from the other side, how Frank Hamer and Manny Galt came out of retirement to track them down. And you see a bit more of the reality of Bonnie and Clyde from the perspective of law enforcement in that. And Kathy Bates plays Ma Ferguson. Texas had a female governor in 1934. What the hell happened to that state?
Ma Ferguson, she's not great as a female role model, as, here's this woman who got elected when times were crazy. She is governor because her husband, who is super corrupt, can't be governor at the moment. But Texas does have a fantastic female governor, Ann Richards, in the 90s. And I don't know when that'll be possible again for them to get a female governor, let alone, but really a female governor who you and I would like.
Yeah, not gonna happen.
Just a detail on how Ma Ferguson happened to be governor. Her name was Miriam Ferguson. She served 2 non-consecutive terms as governor and was the second woman elected to the governorship of any U.S. state to assume office after Nellie Taylor Ross of Wyoming. But she became governor because her husband was impeached, and she said that she would consult him for advice. And she said that the voters would get 2 governors for the price of 1.
It's a position.
And then oh, yes, her husband was investigated for embezzlement.
There's the Texas I know.
Yes, her second term as governor was less controversial than her first. It was rumored that state highway contracts only went to companies that advertised in the Ferguson's newspaper, the Ferguson Forum. Well, that sounds like my home state, New Jersey. And a House committee investigated the rumors, but no charges were ever filed. There were only 45 rangers, and the only means of transportation afforded to them were free railroad passes or using their personal horses.
So you got a Metro card?
Yeah, but it was way less fancy than our subway.
Frank Hamer. Yeah. So Frank Hamer happens upon the 5 of them reading about their own exploits in the newspaper, and he tries to draw on them, but he's clearly outnumbered. And instead of killing him, they humiliate him. They tie him up. They make him pose for photos. that they assure him they'll send out to the newspapers. And this is, like straight up sticking it to the man. And fruitlessly, I might add, they should have just killed him.
Bonnie kisses him full on the mouth and he spits in her face, and that gets them really mad.
They put him on a canoe and send him out into the middle of this body of water that they are sitting near. And then we have another robbery. This is kind of like the platonic ideal of the robbery from this movie. Like every other one you see is a disaster in its own way. And this is the one where you see them like come in and be like, I'm Clyde Barrow and this is Miss Bonnie Parker and we rob banks. And they have a really organized system where everything is moving well. And we have the incident where Clyde famously gives back to the poor in the bank, where he tells the guy, keep your money. We're just here for the bank's money, which is also the people's money because there's no FDIC. And we have this brief montage of seeing how other people are getting in on making this legend real and how it's like starting to ensnare others and it's growing where like people are kind of contributing their own stories to this about how like, oh, I was scared or this happened and everything. And we see that coming to life and it becoming its own animal. We also at this point have some contretemps about dividing the money. Blanche is pretty useless in this film, but she wants a cut. And Clyde gives it to her because she is family and Bonnie is pissed. And in reality, they were able to go see family during this. The neighborhood she lived in basically was like Belfast in the 1970s with the IRA. So she could like go drop off money and the neighborhood would protect her. But we only see the one incident coming up of her seeing her family.
They went home a bunch, and Clyde's way of signaling that they were coming home was he would drive by his father's service station and roll out a Coke bottle with a note in it. And the way that the Parkers and the Barrows would signal to each other that they were going to see Bonnie and Clyde because they thought their phones might be tapped was to say that they were having, I think it was red beans for dinner.
Enter into the film Gene Wilder. For the next 5 minutes, this becomes a Gene Wilder movie. We see him, he's fooling around on the porch with his girlfriend, and we see in the background Clyde and CW stealing his car. Gene Wilder and Evans, who plays his girlfriend, go on chase for them. And ultimately what happens is Bonnie and Clyde and the gang take them on the run with them for a little bit. And they're all having a great time until Gene Wilder tells them that he's an undertaker. And Bonnie tells them to stop the car and get GTFO.
So I was watching this and I was thinking, what an incredibly smart profession to go into, being an undertaker, because people don't stop dying. And usually when someone dies and you have no plan for it, people will just not think before spending money.
You can really hustle in that industry. The Gene Wilder and Evans scene did really happen. But again, though, we have the genius of this screenplay and how they make this event have a weight and a meaning that it probably did not have in the moment, because it serves as another way to remind Bonnie that death is coming for them. They managed to pull off having a day where they see Bonnie's family, and it's this really like sort of beautiful scene that is set against the effects of the Dust Bowl. And it's dreamy and it's almost unreal. We meet her mother, and her mother gets to go into the Lou Gehrig's Mom Hall of Fame for being the oldest woman alive to have a child. The actress who plays her mother is a woman named Mabel Cavett. She was born in 1900, which means she was only 10 years older than the real Bonnie's mom. But this woman, this is the only role she ever played. She was a school teacher in Red Oak, Texas. She was one of the locals watching them shoot scenes in the movie, and she drew the attention of the filmmakers, and she was cast right in that moment to play the role of Bonnie Parker's mom, and that was that for her. We also see at this point Clyde start smooth talking her mother. We see that persona come back out that we haven't seen in a really long time, about how he's going to get married to Bonnie and they're going to live down the street from her and everything's going to be perfect. And we see Bonnie seeing through this, and it's it's really striking, and her face tells us a lot about kind of the feelings that she's having, which are kind of like, it seems like a combination of disgust that he's lying to her mother, as well as betrayal over that, and also like hurt. And she knows she's never going to see her mother again in this scene. And to hear him kind of spinning these tales for her mother's benefit, it seems like it hurts her a lot.
Her mother doesn't believe him. Her mother is saying goodbye to her. It has that feeling of a goodbye for the families. It might as well be that their children are terminally ill and they're having this one last good day before things really head south.
And we're hanging out again at some cabins, and CW and Blanche go to pick up some dinner, and a man catches sight of CW's gun. And not long from this moment, we get into the most violent confrontation we've seen in the movie so far, and it's really bad. So CW suddenly has a box of grenades, and I started laughing in the movie because I was like, when did we pick up a box of loose grenades? But he's throwing out grenades. There's another armored vehicle in this scene. It's all at night. It's really intense and frightening and very confusing, and we don't know what's going on really clearly, but it's pretty upsetting. We see Buck get shot in the head. Blanche is hit in the eye by shrapnel, and they somehow escape in a car, but it's real bad. Like, Buck is going to die. And they get to a clearing, but they get entrapped by the police not long after. Literally, they circle around them. And Bonnie and Clyde and CW escape on foot. But we watch the police surround Buck after they've shot him even more. And I have a really early memory of reading an interview with Gene Hackman in Reader's Digest from like 1993, where he talked about his acting choices in this scene, and how he kind of thought of like the way a bear would move. And like, they're bad people, like, do not get me wrong, but it's heartbreaking to watch him. He dies like an animal. You see him struggling to try and stand, and he can't. And this death is visceral and painful to witness. Like, it really made me feel like sick inside the first time I saw it, and it still does.
In real life, he dies in the hospital, where they say it's not the bullet through the head that killed him, it's the pneumonia from the chest surgery that I'm assuming they did to get other bullets out. And Blanche also acted heroically in real life, staying with Buck after she has glass in both eyes and she can't see. And she's told him there was no hope left, and they're both taken in.
So we see CW is the only one who isn't injured, and he gets a car. He somehow gets Bonnie and Clyde, who've both gotten shot, into the car, gets them to his father's house. Welcome, Dub Taylor, great character actor. And CW's dad is super unhappy about this turn of events, them showing up at the house, but he's most unhappy that CW got a tattoo.
Here in the People's Republic of North Brooklyn, it's so funny to me to see that, wow, there was a time where tattoos were something super outsidery and trashy, where even poor farmers would disdain their kid getting a tattoo. I am surrounded by people with tattoos. If you go to like universities now, kids all have tattoos. So I don't have any because I could never make up my mind about what I wanted where, and the idea of living with it for the rest of my life, it's just too much.
I got my first tattoo like 5 years ago, and I have but one.
And you can cover it up if you need to.
I was kind of amazed by how I'm like, you have hardened criminals in your house right now, and you seem way more upset about that tattoo.
Getting a tattoo was a socially unacceptable thing for a really long time.
Housing fugitives, though, is I mean, not great, but less bad.
Well, his father is more upset at him for having the tattoo than for like stealing and killing and 2 out of 3 things that I just named are in the 10 commandments to not do.
CW's dad kind of puts on this happy face for Bonnie and Clyde, at least for the time being. But his wheels are spinning. And meanwhile, Blanche is wrapped up around her face. And Frank Hamer goes to see her and find out who CW is. And we later see CW's dad. We don't hear the conversation, but he makes a deal with Hamer to give them Bonnie and Clyde. And we're almost in a dream sequence again here where Bonnie and Clyde are laying in the grass. She's reading her poem about them to him that Clyde had sent into the newspaper and got published. And they have sex. He finally can perform.
And he tells her, I thought I was going to make you famous, but you've told my story. You've immortalized me. Her 14 stanza poem has had some staying power. It's become a country song. It's stuck around. And she worked hard on her poetry, right? Like, she was constantly tinkering with things that she'd written versions of when she was in jail.
So should we get Bonnie to the round table, or is that still too much?
I don't think Bonnie could. Who knows? Who knows?
I can see where some of her Texan sensibilities might clash with Dorothy Parker.
I mean, what do you make of her critically as a poet?
Oh, she's probably terrible. Like, I say, like, she's probably terrible because I can't write poetry, so I don't know necessarily. I know some poems that are good and accepted as good, but I also, like, if you put, like, 10 poems in front of me, I probably couldn't tell you which ones are good or bad.
My thing with poetry is I have no patience for it. I love song lyrics as part of the songs they're in. I love beautiful prose, but I don't have any patience for poetry. It gets printed. Look, the thing is, we can make fun of it all we want because we're hoity-toity people, but it does have some sticking power. Probably because she wrote it and she's speaking authentically to her own experience. It has a certain mass appeal that you and I are trained by our overeducation to turn up our noses at. And that's putting it very nicely.
It's her plain spoken truth.
It's plain spoken, it rhymes.
Yeah, like would Dick Shawn be all over it? Probably not. So CW's dad tells him he has made a deal for him and he is not to be in the car with Bonnie and Clyde when they come home from town the next day. And CW's reaction here is so interesting. He's almost giddy in telling his dad that no one will ever get Bonnie and Clyde. They always get away. And even when they're in town the next day, he watches them through a window as they're leaving without him. And he's, again, like almost giddy. Like, it's such an interesting reaction, like almost like even though he's part of the human story, he's sort of like in the myth where he's like, well, they'll never die. And then they are driving home. They run into his dad. They are ambushed. And this sequence is so beautifully edited. So this is the end of the movie, everyone. There are over 60 shots in 60 seconds of film. And this scene is still very shocking in its violence because it just goes on and on. There are 25 seconds of gunshots, and Penn was inspired by the real life violence of the Watts riots and the Kennedy assassination.
I have a question for you. You said there are 60 shots in 60 seconds. So explain to me how the multitude of shots in a brief amount of time is great in Bonnie and Clyde, but bad in the Bohemian Rhapsody scene where they're all sitting around making the deal with the character who is played by the actor I call Rob Stark in Rocket Man.
It's purposeful. I think it's intentional. It's art. It's saying something. It's using editing to tell a story. Whereas Rocket Man, not sure what that was telling me in that scene.
No, you mean Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yes, Bohemian Rhapsody. Sorry, I was all confused and turned around there on the multitude.
Remember the name John Reed, but I remembered that he was played by Littlefinger from Game of Thrones in Bohemian Rhapsody, but he was played by Rob Stark in Rocket Man.
We have a John Reed multiverse. That is so insane. It's done to make the violence feel even more shocking. And you even see like referential to the Kennedy assassination. You see a piece of head that comes off of Clyde. Also, he was really inspired by Seven Samurai, Breathless, and this is a Pruder film, which, that tracks. We see like the law is making a point and an example, and they totally did that in real life too. They made an example.
Do you want to know how this actually played out? They did keep shooting, but they got Clyde down with one bullet, and Bonnie had a second of knowing that Clyde was dead while she was still alive, and she screamed, and the lawmen said that they remembered the sound of that scream for the rest of their lives.
That sounds horrible.
But of course, they keep shooting, so the car winds up all full of bullets, and you can now see it in a casino in Nevada. We also missed, among the hijinks of the Barrow life on the lam, the time where a desperate Clyde tried to hide bullet holes in a car by patching them with mud.
God bless Clyde. Oh, you tried so hard. He tried so hard. He is like the definition of like, you're so close, man. You're so close.
Like Dillinger and Pretty Boy Floyd had places they could hide out in within the criminal underworld. Bonnie and Clyde didn't have that. Like even compared to other famous criminals, they were hard scrabble.
It seems like though all like Dillinger had to do was basically like walk across town and he was fine. But yeah, these two. And then yeah, like they're making their point. And we see the final shot of the police looking at them in the car through a bullet hole in the glass. And this movie sort of like really portends to what's to come in just this very magical, fateful way. It's a decade that ends shortly after in very terrible violence connected with celebrity, obviously Manson, Altamont, RFK and MLK's assassinations that year that this movie came out. And you might want to ask yourself, did Bonnie and Clyde the movie change the way we looked at those events and saw them? Or was it a new kind of violence inspired by shifts in the culture? And it's also like, since time immemorial, America has met actions outside of the norm, good and bad, like everything from Waco to the MOVE bombing in Philly to the Black Panthers, with excessive force that serves as a warning and a reminder to the rest of us to stay in line and not get cute. And we see that here in the way that their story is interpreted. The film takes a pretty light touch to all of this compared to how it probably would be done now, and how they're being perceived as heroic, but it's definitely there.
So a note on the death scene. For the first time in a bit, we have corpse capers this week. So in real life, what happened was almost as soon as the shootout was done, there were crowds around the car because people wanted pieces of Bonnie and Clyde, and the cops had to beat them off. Someone tried to cut off Clyde's ear. People got bits of their hair. They wanted a piece of Bonnie and Clyde, but they do get buried. Somebody offered Clyde's mother $10,000 for his body. I don't know what they were planning to do with it. I certainly wouldn't want to clone him. He does not seem to have been an exceptional person, enough so to warrant cloning.
Oh.
And after all these years, even though Bonnie said in her poem that they should be buried side by side, they still are not buried together because Bonnie's mother said that Clyde got her while she was alive and he couldn't have her when she was dead. So they're buried separately, but Bonnie's niece, who is still alive, has been trying for a long time to have her relocated. And I think there's some story that like they've gone to court about it, but the owner of the cemetery where she's buried keeps finding reasons. And I think it seems to me he likes the tourist money from having Bonnie Parker in his cemetery. Clyde's grave is a little bit harder to find in the cemetery. And the story behind that is that when his parents buried Buck, they didn't get a headstone. And what they told Clyde was, well, you're probably going to die soon too. So we'd rather save the expense of getting 2 headstone engravings done and just do both of you at the same time under one headstone. And he agreed with them that this was a great idea.
You know, it's interesting because we've talked a lot about how people needed to have like a pride of children in order to get like a couple through to adulthood. But this is kind of a new twist on that, where it's like you have to have many, many children because some of them are bound to become criminals.
There were a lot of kids in the Barrow family, actually. Like, he had multiple brothers, and many Barrow children had trouble with the law. The Barrow and Parker families continue to struggle with poverty. At one point, Clyde's mother goes on the road with someone who's doing like a show with like Bonnie and Clyde artifacts about crime doesn't pay, and she can only take it for so long. But eventually, Bonnie's niece and Clyde's nephew, like multiple members of the Barrow and Parker family, have gotten to travel for conventions to places that Bonnie and Clyde never dreamt they'd go to, like Germany. Anyway, it was a sad life, and I believe we have some awards talk.
We do. We weren't the only people who liked this movie. This movie, oh, got all the nominations and probably should have won all the awards. But this was a really brutal year in film history and one of the most like bonkers years in film history. As I mentioned up top, the book Pictures at a Revolution is a must read if you're interested in this, but it gets into the 5 films that were nominated for Best Picture that year. 3 of which are total bangers, one that's pretty okay and one that's awful. So In the Heat of the Night was the winner for Best Picture, Bonnie and Clyde. Dr. Dolittle, starring alleged murderer Rex Harrison. And oh boy, does that book not paint a very nice picture of Rex Harrison, nor should it. The Graduate and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. So Best Directing, Mike Nichols won for The Graduate, but Arthur Penn was nominated. Stanley Kramer for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Richard Brooks for In Cold Blood, which is an incredible movie. And Norman Jewison for In the Heat of the Night. I don't want to go through every single award here because yikes on bikes. It was nominated in all the categories. So Best Actress, Best Actor, Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Hackman and Pollard, and Best Actress in a Supporting Role for Estelle Parsons, and she won. Screenplay was nominated. And I think I want to talk a little bit more about the legacy that this movie has had beyond those awards.
Sure.
It's on Entertainment Weekly's 100 Greatest Movies of All Time. It's on Time's 100 Greatest Movies. Total Film's 100 Greatest Movies. The Guardian Best Crime Movies. Hollywood Reporter, Hollywood's 100 Favorite Films. It's been on a variety of AFI's 100 Years lists. It was selected in 1992 for preservation in the U.S. National Film Registry. It was ranked by the Motion Picture Editors Guild as the 5th best edited film of all time based on the membership. This Dede Allen is brilliant. I love that, it's another woman editor who really helped change the game. Like, I think that there's not an Oscar for the legacy, but like in terms of like what this movie represented, what it has represented, and the way that it shaped the culture so thoroughly, and the way it changed filmmaking, like there's, this is a movie that really changed the way these things were done. It's an incredible triumph for Warren Beatty, who, as I mentioned, was thought of as a lightweight. It gave him like the blank check that he used to make movies like Shampoo, which is a really incredible movie, and Reds, which I can't with John Reed's anywhere.
If we ever do Reds, I'm just going to be sitting there going, fuck this guy. He's an insufferable dude, bro. Fuck this guy. That's going to be my entire commentary the whole time.
I mean,
Like,
I think the thing that
over and over
bothers
again.
me even more than that about John Reed is like interloping on another country to help them with their revolution. I'm kind of like, don't be that guy.
Is it white saviorism if they're even paler than you?
I don't know what it is, but I would say at the very least it's meddling in shit you don't understand.
Well, yeah.
It not even made him, it showed us what he was capable of as a filmmaker. Also, like, to me, this is Faye Dunaway's movie. That kind of stood out to me watching it this time around. Like, this to me feels like it's like 45% Bonnie's story over Clyde's.
So I forgot to mention when we were there that scene. It's right after she's read her poem from the paper and they've had good sex. And she asks him, like, what would you do if we could get out of here? And that's the scene that to me stays with me the most, where his plan is just to have robberies in a different state than they live in. And I think that's the moment where she really gives up. She has this moment of everything's changed. Maybe we could go off somewhere and make a living doing something else, and this will all just be in the past. That's the moment where she fully integrates in that it's where she fully ingests that they're gonna die. And there's like no way other than that they die because they can't think of any other way of life. Like, she doesn't have an idea. She's asking him what's his like most crazy out there idea, and his is just, oh, we do our robberies in a different state that we live in because the cops can't go over state lines. And that's the scene from this that has stayed with me the most.
Yeah. Yeah, that hurts, that scene.
And the look on her face. And then also that, like, right before she gets shot, she's exclaiming over that Hummel figurine that
That makes me
neither,
so sad.
like, oh, are the fingernails so delicate? She has this one moment of joy over what she thinks is this delicate, beautiful piece of artwork. And it's china and it's fragile. And then do we see the shepherdess shatter?
No, at least I didn't clock it when I was watching it, but
And you've
there's
seen
a
that enough
lot.
times that you clock that.
Yeah, there's a lot to look at in the death scene.
All right. So for choice dialogue, I wrote down a few things, but the really key piece of dialogue here is we rob banks.
I have nothing to add except this screenplay is incredible. I do love the moment, but it's more of a reaction than a line, where Evans says that she's 33 and you see Gene Wilder's face respond for days.
So old, 33. I mean, let's just let's just send this woman to the glue factory with the horses.
Anyway, should we rate this movie?
Yes, let's rate this movie. I will go first.
So we rate movies on a 1 to 10 scale across 10 areas that we find to be subjectively and or objectively important to most films, but specially tailored to specific issues particular to biopics. If you want more details on how we score movies, please scroll down our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com. You'll also find a record of our scores for past episodes. And with that out of the way, let's score this thing.
All right. So for outward appearances, I gave it a 9 just to reflect that nobody, but this time I'm only taking off 1 point for reflecting that nobody looks like who they're supposed to be, because I have to do that. I have to. I have to take something off. For acting and casting, I gave it a 10. Passage of time, I'm giving it a 7. For quality of the script, for costuming, I'm giving it a 10. For quality of the script, I'm giving it a 10. For accuracy, I'm giving it a 4. For storytelling, 10. Production value, 10. Production direction, decision making, 10. Do we care? 10. So all of those together come to 9, but I'm using the bye this week because Bonnie and Clyde deserves a 10. It's getting a 10.
So, outward appearances, makeup and hair, 10. Acting and casting, 10. Passage of time, 7. Costuming, 10. Quality of the script, 10. Accuracy, 7. Storytelling, 9. Production value, 9. Production direction decision making, 10. Do we care? 8. My total came out to 9.0, and I am using my bye this week. So, also a 10. I mean, what can you do?
It's one of a short list of films where you have to call them perfect, which means your quibbles are canceled out.
Yeah, it's a perfect movie.
This is, I believe, episode 67, and we've only given 2 other perfect 10s, and that was for Milk and for Lincoln. So, Bonnie and Clyde, you earned a second opinion.
Oh, did you ever? So yeah, now it is time for second opinion, the element we stole from How Did This Get Made?
We sure did.
The prize for scoring above an 8 or below a 4 is that you get to hear us make fun of IMDb reviewers who disagreed with our assessment of this film. So this is a 1 out of 10 stars review from someone named McAdoo, written on February 4th, 2021. Title: Let's all make a movie glamorizing psychopaths. That'll be fun. When this movie came out, it was touted as groundbreaking. It was said that it would change American cinema forever, and Arthur Penn was applauded. By his fellow adults in Hollywood, anyway. It nauseated me then and still does now. Thankfully, Netflix set the record straight with The Highwaymen last year. Bonnie and Clyde murdered a lot of people, and not just police officers, regular people with families, for no other reason than they enjoyed it. They were full-blown psychopaths who resembled Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway about as much as I do. I have a real problem with glorifying murderers and making them into half-assed folk heroes. I really do. Hollywood has never had a chokehold. Hollywood has never had a chokehold on reality, and I suppose they never will, but this goes beyond that. This is supposed to be about real people. Bonnie and Clyde were real people. They bore no resemblance to anything in this movie, other than the fact that they killed people, and even that is stylized here. This is a typical ultra-violent, quote, stylish movie of the 1960s that unfortunately set the standard for years to come. Don't bother. It's not only dated, it was never that good to begin with, and the way it treats its subject matter is disgusting. 8 out of 13 people found this review helpful.
So my reaction to this review is that this review was boring, and the writer of it sounds boring.
Also, like, I've been seeing this meme a lot lately because of some things that are going on in the social media sphere, and it's like of a person, it's of a stick figure, and it's of the point going over their head and saying like, just missed it. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening here. There's a lot of sort of like supposing about Hollywood in this that leads me to believe that this person isn't really the target audience for this movie, or for really any movie outside of like one of those movies about like, you know, like God is not dead.
So I'm going to read the second one here. 1 star out of 10. Big disappointment, which was written by Tom Windsor-78154 on June 7th of 2021. Usually when I see a 5-digit number after someone's name, I assume it's their zip codes.
Doesn't seem like a super smart way to create an internet ID.
Your first name, your last name, and your zip code.
Yeah, I mean,
no, it does not.
Like, just throw in like this CCN number on your credit card and your social security number.
He could have moved. Maybe he saw, oh no, I used my last name and my zip code in, yes, in my IMDb.
Only option available to me is moving. We've all been there.
Yeah, I'm sure all of us have to move a few zip codes over after accidentally using our zip code and our full name in an online handle. They would probably just had a bunch to say and they were trying to come up with a name really quickly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because these critiques are not going to write themselves.
No. So why put enough thought into your name when coming up with the handle? Yes. So what Tom Windsor 78154 had to say about Bonnie and Clyde on June 7th of 2021 in their review, 1 star out of 10, big disappointment. I don't know if movies are just better done in present day or what, but the 1967 Bonnie and Clyde was a huge disappointment to me. I was astonished at the overacting and poor performance of both Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty. Being the big name actors they were known as, I expect Sarah is like giving a very adamant thumbs down here.
He's right.
Being the big name actors they were, I expected much better. Perhaps it was the script or the direction. The performance of Estelle Parsons as Blanche was especially pathetic. As far as being historically accurate, well, the movie miserably failed on this score as well, especially the ending. Many of the true facts were significantly altered. I see no need to alter the facts. The truth is quite compelling and dramatic. 7 out of 10 people found this helpful, but I did. Were you stretching or did you have your hand raised in there?
I do have a question.
Yes.
Did they not die in real life? Because he says the movie failed miserably at being accurate, especially the ending. Like, something happened.
Maybe it's all a conspiracy theory. Maybe they aren't dead. Maybe they're still out there, Bonnie and Clyde. Maybe, I mean, they'd be actuarially very, very, very old. They'd be the oldest couple in the history of the world. But who knows?
I mean, she would have had to get that leg taken care of, I think.
So can I read one more?
Of course you can.
All right. So this next review, written by McAples -04112 on June 13th of 2019. The title of this review, 1 star out of 10. Worst movie I've seen in a long time. How did this movie receive any accolades? I could not find a single thing redeeming in the entire movie. The acting was bad. The screenplay was awful. It was about as inaccurate as it could possibly be. The whole scene with Gene Wilder was just plain stupid. And what about Blanche? They should have shot her in the head the moment she showed up. 10 out of 12 people found this review helpful. What is wrong with people?
The shooting Blanche in the head the moment she showed up thing is a little repulsive and concerning.
I mean, she's annoying, but within the context of the movie, she's a person. The scene with Gene Wilder is great.
It's so good. It shows us once again that Gene Wilder can walk into a movie, steal it, and then walk out.
So I'm going to quote my grandpop Jack here, because he used to say, "You don't know what good is." All right. So I guess with that, other stuff that you should watch instead. Oh my God, watch Bonnie and Clyde. And we were a little down on Roger Ebert last week for his assessment of The Devils. So I have something from Roger Ebert to recommend. If you need a laugh, and who turns down a laugh, please go read Roger Ebert's review for Jaws 4. It's hilarious.
I love an outraged critic so much. It makes me so happy when they turn on their hate machine.
Sarah, you have some things to recommend in addition to Bonnie and Clyde.
I do. I have a ton of things to recommend. So, as I mentioned, I can't overstate how great Mark Harris's book, Pictures at a Revolution, is. It goes in deep across all 5 Best Picture nominees that year. I do mention again here that he showcases alleged murderer Rex Harrison in his truest form, and really captures that. I would also recommend, I mean, if you're interested in this period of time in filmmaking, I would recommend Down and Dirty Pictures by Peter Biskind, which is a really complete look at this era of filmmaking, and you find out more about all of these players. I also mentioned The Highwaymen earlier, as did one of our reviewers, and it is a really solid little movie that looks at the other side of this from the lawmaking perspective. And is really compelling, and I think portrays Bonnie and Clyde probably a little bit more as they, like should be portrayed in a movie that is about them being criminals. When I first read Pictures at a Revolution when it came out, I tried to watch all 5 Best Picture nominees, and I say try because Dr. Dolittle is unwatchable.
Retractions, apologies, and listener mailbag. So we wanted to call out something that Sara was right about this week. We do not have anything to apologize for.
Nope.
But Sara?
Allow me, if you will, to read a headline in Deadline.com from August 29th in an article about a film premiering at the Telluride Film Festival. Title, Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere Review. Jeremy Allen White and Scott Cooper's raw and fearless portrait of an artist searching for himself. I told you.
You did.
We're calling it brave to play Bruce Springsteen and to make a movie about him.
You want to know something? We're not doing that episode till December. I don't care. Okay? I have a slate of movies for November that I've been looking forward to that we'd have to totally throw off in order to get this movie in close to its release. Fine, I'll get it in time for Oscar season. I don't mind giving it the first or second slot in December, because that means we can go see the movie when it's been out for a few weeks and the theater's nice and empty, and I can take my notes with the little light up pen without annoying anyone. But the hell I'm going to see that opening weekend or shaft anything in November, or we're not doing that movie till December, and that's that. You're not pushing me on this, okay?
No. I'm not pushing you on this. I'm not eager to go see this movie. Oh God, I'm so tired. Couple of items before we go. Our podcast baby has matured, and we have launched a Patreon, simply an effort to defray some of the costs associated with bringing our show to you: platform hosting costs, recording, research. Occasionally we have to order a book off the internet, and we sometimes pay for movie rentals. And we are offering shout outs and access to our awful first 3 episodes to anyone who chips in for us. And with that, we'd love to thank Gates, who signed up already. Thank you, Gates.
Thank you, Gates.
And if you liked our show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. You can follow us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, where we have visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is at Biopic a Podcast Story, so do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. Please also check out our webpage at biopicapodcaststory.podbean.com to see the official episode ratings for all of the movies we've done so far. If you would like to get in touch, you can email us at biopiclistenermailbag@gmail.com. Our theme music is by Ben Patch, and the intro to our show is his song Slater Cannonball, and the outro is Spring Breakers, and you can check him out on Spotify.
Tune in next week when we might be talking about Lawrence of Arabia.
Yay! Or something else. So, yeah, it's an adventure.
Yes. So, with that, good night to the earnest and the cynical.
Good night, Rena.
Good night, Sara.